I knew. Welcome. Welcome to class, ladies. I know what you were hoping for. You were saying, oh man, I hope she talks about the difference between Rene Descartes and John Locke. Well, you are so fortunate because that is exactly what we're going to do right now. But first, we're going to open in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you are the author of reason and you are the author of faith, and they are not mutually exclusive. Thank you for this story. Thank you for this man who loved you in a way that I aspire to get to. Father, I just invite you to be with us, and I pray that you teach us this truth in a new and real way, and then help us to carve out one doable thing in our life and slave world, Lord. Because John 10:10 is a real thing, and that's where we're headed. Thank you so much for all that you're going to do. Amen. All right. So, I bet you were wondering why this was up here. Well, let me show you. We're going to talk about reasoning, right? Right, ladies? We're going to talk about two main philosophers. Both of them played a big part in the origins of our country, the origin of our legal system, and the origin of our healthcare system. What? I know. So, these two guys, John Locke and Rene Descartes, would not be friends because they had diametrically opposing philosophies of how to think. Let's start with Descartes. He's the father of modern math, right? We all had to learn about him. Sorry. Descartes is a rationalist. What is a rationalist? Oh, well, it's to approach things in a rational manner. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. We've all heard that. Cogito ergo sum. That's how he said it. But what it translates to is, I think, therefore I am. And what he said is that there are some truths that are evident, that have permeated our reality, so that they are knowable and unchangeable. So he said, when you're reasoning, you form a hypothesis, and then you collect data, and then you have an outcome. And anything that comes out will be true if what you started with is true. So that's why we have it represented by a triangle that starts with narrow at the top, wide at the bottom. What I know informs what I believe. All that I believe informs what I perceive. So that's Renee. Okay, over here we have John. Okay, John was during the whole time when the world was exploding during the Renaissance, and he's an empiricist, which means you have to empirically prove it before I will believe it. So if I can't see it, touch it, hold it, I can't know it. So he said, all that I perceive informs what I believe. That is why it starts out here with he's collecting all of this data, then it's going down through, and then he comes out at the bottom with what he believes. So these two guys wouldn't go out to coffee. Why? Well, because this is how it would look. Okay, Descartes believes that there's some knowable truth out there. So he would go up to the door, and if the door said coffee, he would say, it's reasonable to assume that this place sells coffee because the door says coffee. So he starts with a hypothesis. If the hypothesis is true, everything that comes out will also be true. If his hypothesis is wrong, the outcome is variable. Okay? So if this thing said drinks, and he assumed that they sold coffee, then his hypothesis was incorrect. Thus, his results are variable. So Descartes would say, door says coffee. There's some knowable things in the world. I'm going to go in and get a cup of coffee. John Locke comes up to the same coffee shop. He has to go inside. He has to hear the beans grinding. He has to smell the coffee baking, percolating. And I'm like, Okay, that's not what I do. I just drink it. Okay, so he has to smell the coffee, see it getting poured into the cup, and then he would say, I'm going to get coffee here. So the problem is he would have to test every single coffee shop before he would call it a coffee shop. Ooh, there's a job I would like. Why is this important? Well, because we live in Seattle and a good cup of coffee is life-saving. Actually, why is this important? Well, because how we perceive the world says a lot about our baseline beliefs about God and about how faith in God works. Okay, so I'm going to take these off because I don't wear glasses and these are colossally distracting. I can still see the rooms. And probably going to, just like a L'Oreal commercial. Is L'Oreal still a thing? Is it? Okay. That was when I was in high school. We all wanted to be a L'Oreal girl. Did I just date myself? Yes. Okay. All right. All that goes down there. Okay. So in 1639 is the very first time this idiom is recorded. Seeing is believing. And that's kind of what the world will tell you. Seeing is believing. In the 21st century, it's hard to believe that anyone could question the validity of what our eyes tell us. But if you can't believe your own eyes, what can you believe? In fact, our court system is set up on this. So if you have an eyewitness, that is entered in as evidential fact. But then there's also this expression, do my eyes deceive me? Maybe they do. And because they do, many things we take for granted or accept as scientific fact may be doubtful, if not entirely false. The truth is that our senses are easily fooled. Magicians count on this when they time and time again successfully pull the wool over our eyes. Enter Exhibit A. I'm going to show you an optical illusion. Now. Oh, there we go. Okay. That is Rubens' vase. So when you look at it, you can either see a vase or you can see two faces looking at each other. But you cannot see both at the same time. It has to flicker. Okay? That was, Edgar Rubin was a Denmark's most famous psychologist, and he did a lot of research on perception. And I'm going to show you another one that's more everyday. Okay. Do you know what non-readers and non-English speakers see when they look at that truck? When they look at the insignia? The logo? The arrow. Can you see the arrow? Okay, now that you've seen it, you can never unsee it. Okay, the arrow between the E and the X. Okay, how many times have you looked at that and not seen the arrow? Okay. That's why sometimes it's good to include an outsider because they'll see stuff that we haven't seen. I'll give you guys a minute to find the arrow. Aside from the fact that we are often fooled by deliberate optical illusions, the issue is this: how do we see really? Students of the scientific process and science historians continue to wrestle with this problem. It would seem that we as people can only see what we are conditioned to see. Robert Davies says, the eye only sees what the mind is prepared to comprehend. Case in point, you buy a new car, you get your new used car, or you're thinking about getting this car. Now, everywhere you go, do you not see hundreds of them on the road, whereas before you never saw them before? Or, let's say you're selling your house or in the market to buy a house. Do you now see every for sale sign that you whiz by? Okay, when we're not going to buy a house, we don't see them. One time I said to my husband, the house next door is for sale. He's like, it is? next door. Okay, then. Friedrich Nietzsche said, all things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at any given time is a function of power and not of truth. Remember, Nietzsche was an atheist, and he's the one who said God is dead. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at any given time is a function of power and not of truth. So the question would be, do we see and understand God because we were raised in the Judeo-Christian ethic? Because that's Nietzsche's assertion. When little birds are hopping in your backyard, they have to keep cocking their head. And that is because they can only see their bugs when their head is moving because it gives them a frame of reference. Everybody needs a frame of reference. And we so much believe in this inductive reasoning, and yet our eyes deceive us all the time. On August 23rd in the year 2000, Gulf Air Flight 72 flew itself into the ocean 2.5 miles from the landing strip. And they had a GPS on board, and they had the control tower screaming in the thing, and the pilot said, no, it's right in front of me. And the weather conditions and the setting sun had created an optical illusion so that they thought they were seeing the landing strip. And they refused, they ignored the panel, the GPS right in front of them, and the voice in their ear because they could not distrust their own eyes. And they flew the plane into the ocean, and all 331 people on board perished. Because we so believe that seeing is believing. Most pilots will tell you that they have to learn in pilot training to overcome the blind spot. We all have one. It's where the nerve attaches at the back of our eye, and our brain just fills in that hole. But we're not actually seeing things there. And so pilots, that becomes aware, they're aware of that when they're trying to do line of sight flying. And so they know exactly where their blind spot is and how to adjust for it. And I was wondering, when I was reading all this stuff, the problem about having a blind spot is that we're blind to it. How annoying. Before you write off this whole discussion as a lesson or an exercise in semantics, let's just take a moment to think about how much inductive and deductive reasoning changes our culture. Did you know that all of Western medicine is based in science and the scientific process? I form a hypothesis, I test it, and then I form a new hypothesis. I either find it valid or invalid, and then I move on to the next thing based on what I found. The cure for cancer or some other debilitating disease relies totally on what scientists turn up in their research. Most such research is carried out within the framework of certain assumptions and prepositions. As they hunt for that elusive cure or breakthrough, researchers are unlikely to find anything outside of what they are looking for. It makes sense, really, unless you know what you are looking for. How do you know when you found it? To connect the dots, you need dots to connect. So that's the dilemma then. Before you can open up a new line of research, you need a new idea. And those, unfortunately, are very few and far between. Most of the time, it comes with a stroke of insight or an inspirational thought. And then it kicks in the scientific process as you test the thought. But the thought came from a completely random thing. So the guy observes the apple falling off the tree, and he comes up with the idea of gravity. I once had a professor explain it to me. It's like when we do research, we're looking for a needle in a haystack. The problem is the answer is in a different haystack. So what are we doing then? He's going, we're making really sure, really, really sure that cancer kills people. That's what we're doing. So what does that have to do with us on the way to Walmart on any given Wednesday? Is what I was asking God. And he says, oh, just about everything. So let's crack open our Bibles, ladies. Get into it. Before we turn to our main passage in 2 Kings, we're going to look at a verse that's trotted out and quoted quite frequently without anybody knowing exactly what it means. Hebrews 11:1. Hebrews 11:1. I'm going to read it in the King James because that is actually the most accurate translation of this verse. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. How many people heard this verse as a child and said, well, that clears up nothing? Thanks for the definition. Wow. It's red because it's red. That helps. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay, so I got to tell you, for decades, as a confirmed church lady, completely saved, had the 4 spiritual laws down pat, led many people to the Lord. I was like flipping them through just like a McDonald's person. I'm like, okay, we got to get down to the business of you getting saved. I knew what I was doing. But when verses like this came up, I would do the smile and nod. You know what it is. Okay, that means I have no idea really what that verse means. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So what I heard in my kid ears that translated to my adult modus operandi is, I sure hope it's true. I sure hope it's true, and I'm living like it's true because I hope it's true. I guess we'll wait till we're dead. Then we'll all know. Right? Okay, that is not anywhere in this verse. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Your believing is what they would hold up in a court of law to prove that things that do not exist and you cannot see, they exist but you cannot see, that those things will come to fruition. Your faith is the evidence that those things exist. Your faith is the evidence that God exists. This is not some pie in the sky wishing upon a star. This is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is believing what you know exists, even when you cannot see it. Faith is believing that what you know to be true exists, even when you cannot see it. It's not hoping for these things to exist. I know it sounds like we're splitting hairs, but you'll see in the story that what starts as a minor difference, by the time you're functionally applying it in the real world, is a gulf between two positions. One is inductive reasoning. I see, and then I form my thought, and I believe. One is deductive. I know, thus I believe. All right. So here's what we've got. Number one, the essence of faith is informed belief. The essence of faith is informed belief. So the fact that I know these things exist even when I can't see them, that is the evidence that those things exist. Okay, I've said it like 7 different ways now. And every time I'm like, did it come out right? Okay. I know these things exist, and my belief in those things that I cannot see is faith that they exist. And here's why. Because he goes, the Hall of Fame goes through all these people who there's no human way they could have continued to believe and lived through what they lived through. If you are looking for something to memorize over the summer, I highly recommend Hebrews 11. All right. Belief must be based in truth. So first we have the essence of faith is informed belief. Number 2, belief must be based in truth. Because you know what? It's not enough to believe. You have to believe the real thing. You have to believe a true thing. So deductive reasoning says that if your initial premise is true, everything that comes out of it will also be true. So what the world will tell you is that belief is a good thing. Oh, just believe. Believe. I was with my kid in a store at Christmas time. They were quite young, and there was a big sign that said, believe. And Teddy got really excited because he's like, well, they're all believing in Jesus. And I'm like, maybe, or Santa. We'll just leave that big question mark right there. Faith is not just believing, it's believing the right thing. A.W. Tozer said, I do not recall another period of time when faith was as popular as it is today. If only we believe hard enough, we'll make it somehow. So goes the popular chant. What you believe is not important, only to believe. What is overlooked in all this is that faith is only good when it engages in truth. When it is made to rest upon falsehood, it can and often does lead to eternal tragedy. For it is not enough that we believe, we must believe the right thing about the right one. It's not enough to believe. Romans 14:5, each one of you should be fully convinced in his own mind. God is not asking you to check your mind anywhere. He wants you to fully engage it in your faith. Matthew 24, verse 4, Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. John 20, verses 25 through 28. When the other disciples told him that they had seen the Lord, he declared, I will not believe it. Inductive reasoning. Until I see it. A week later, Jesus said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. He's talking about us. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. Inductive reasoning, Thomas. Let me put my hand in there. Why did Jesus not let himself be pushed into doing miracles? No amount of seeing would ever cause belief. It causes interest. No amount of miracles was going to change a heart. Jesus rose from the dead. Remember last week the Pharisees completely missed it. John 20:31, these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life. Romans 10:17, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. Please teach your children that Christianity is all about reason. I love what C.S. Lewis said. He said, if given a choice between pursuing knowledge and pursuing God, he would choose knowledge every time, because you can't go but 5 steps without falling into the arms of God. So, here's what we know about faith so far. The essence of faith is informed belief. Belief must be based in truth. It's not enough to believe just anything. What you believe affects what you see. Number 3, what you believe affects what you see. We must constantly ask God to open our eyes to what's really happening all around us. Aldous Huxley said there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. That's an amazing quote. I actually was given that by a professor. He would start all of his lectures at the beginning of the year with this quote on the board. There are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. Ephesians 1:16, I have not stopped giving thanks for you, remembering you in my prayers. I kept asking the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, that he might give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. What you believe affects what you see. What is it that we need? What are we slaving away in slave world for? It's so that our eyes become more and more open to the real around us. When they're opened when we are saved, but there is a continual need to ask the Lord to give us further spiritual insight and revelation. Here's one of my favorite verses. Ephesians 3:17. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and how long and high and how deep is the love of Christ, and to know that this love surpasses what? Knowledge. That you may be filled to the full measure of all the fullness of God. I'd read that verses for years and years and years. And then one day I'm like, what? What do you mean full measure? Ring, ring. Am I walking around with something less than the full measure? Bingo. Hallelujah. So glad you are paying attention, sweetheart. John 10:10, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Does your life feel full of the stuff that God's trying to get in there? So now we finally come to the story of Elisha. I got to give you just a little background because that's what I do. But if you read the story in 3D, you got to know that the straits are dire. Elisha is God's prophet during the dwindling days of the empire. So we're going to back up. This happens before Daniel. Jehoram had become king upon the accidental death of his brother. Oops. Didn't see that skateboard. The Bible account characterizes Jehoram as evil. And in his 12-year reign, we see a back and forth wavering. At times, he was friendly with the Lord's prophet Elisha, and at times, he persecuted him. Sometimes he was faithful to the Lord, and other times, he blamed the Lord for problems caused by his own sin. So Elisha took over from the main guy, Elijah, right? And thank you so much. Their names are off by one sound. Elisha was the advisor of kings, but he is very, very different than his predecessor. So remember now, the kingdom is broken in two. There's two kings, and soon they will be conquered by Assyrians and taken off to Babylon. And this is a fulfillment of God's conditional providence. Israel was unfaithful and was no longer listening to God or to his prophets. But Elijah, he was a solitary figure. Lone wolf. Why? Because people were ruthlessly trying to kill him. And so he spent a lot of time in the desert, hiding, okay? But Elisha is different. Elisha is always in community. Elisha has a posse, an entourage. All right. Elisha lives and moves with a group called the Sons of Prophets. And Elisha has a lot to teach us about living in community and about fellowship. So before we jump into the main event, you know, in the 3D story, there's always information that comes before the story that you get to. So we're going to back up and read just a little bit of 2 Kings chapter 5. All right, we're going to talk about somebody that was living in community with Elisha named Gehazi. Gehazi was a servant, and he was an A-plus servant. He was completely devoted to Elisha's job. So I'm going to read a little bit about him starting in verse 19. So what you got to know is a really rich dude came and received healing from Elisha and then offered a bunch of money and possessions. And Elisha said, nope, you're good. Go in peace, right? Okay. So Gehazi's standing there, and he's like, I think I need to massage the situation a little bit. All right, so we're picking up verse 19. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. Although we should at least be taking things from the foreigners. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from his chariot to meet him. Hey, is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then he tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the thing from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent away the men, and they left. On account of, I don't want the receipt from Macy showing when somebody gets home. When he went in and stood before his master, Elijah asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Creepy. Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or of olive groves and vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elijah's presence, and his skin was leprous, and it has become as white as snow. Whoa. Gehazi is worthy of our pity. He had been a good servant, far better than most. He had a rare experience living daily in the presence of a great prophet, sharing in his work and witnessing his power. But that did not save him from great failure. It actually helped his case to bring it about. For the secret of his trouble lay in the fact that Gehazi was ruined by familiarity with sacred things. And this is the killer of fellowship. When we forget how precious is our time together, we forget that we are but bondservants, and we slip into our Romans 7 self. Hey, did you hear? Day after day, Gehazi had gone out with the prophet, and he had seen God's power flow out of him, changing lives, restoring lives, renewing lives. I do not doubt that in the beginning, he was so impressed and so excited to be there. No doubt he had followed Elijah with genuine admiration and love, and attached himself with the purest of motive. His very obedience was evidence of his loyalty. The problem is, time goes by, and we are sheep. And we start thinking that we're maybe a little bit more important than we are. And maybe God's business isn't as sacred today as it was yesterday. There's a very subtle danger here. It lies in the fact that the things that are sacred should always be sacred. Going to church, praying, listening to somebody's prayer request. But time goes by, and it becomes commonplace. God came to make the mundane sacred. And when you're living in fellowship, that is exactly what happens. Any day can bust into an amazing opportunity to fellowship with another believer. I remember one time we were painting a nursery, and she was pregnant, thus emotional. And I was painting as fast as I could the colors that she wanted, and she kept saying all of these negative things that just didn't sound like her. So finally I said, "Are you okay?" And because she was not okay. She had been carrying around some heavy stuff. And we ruined 3 paintbrushes because they dried in the bucket as we sat in that nursery and prayed to the God who hears. And that, she goes, every time I was in that nursery after that, she wouldn't even let her husband repaint it. After the kids had grown out of it, she goes, this room is where God came when I needed him most. The mundane is our sacred place because we know who we belong to. That's where Gehazi went wrong. All right, poor Gehazi. He is redeemed a little bit later. You got to read and find out about it because God is a God of second chances. All right, so now we're going to move in to chapter 6. We're going to skip over the amazing axe head episode, but I highly recommend reading it, and you could do a whole Bible study on it. And you've got boys. That's a great one to talk about. All right, so now we're going to go forward and talk about why understanding what fellowship is important in this next story. Because guess what? Elisha still has his posse. And he doesn't forsake fellowship just because one guy blew it, right? So he has new servant guy, right? New servant guy really doesn't even get a name. He's new servant guy. All right. All right. Now the problem with Israel is that the people did what was right in their own eyes. They lost sight of who God is, and they broke his covenant. The Syrians are the bad guys. And they're on the march, and they're looking to invade and conquer Israel. In chapter 6, the king of Syria, the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, hires raiders to go and weaken Israel. Okay, so here's Ben-Hadad, and he's like, dude, I don't want to be seen like opposing Israel, so I'm going to go hire, like there was like soldiers for hire. I'm going to go hire this army for hire and send them in. And that way, if things go wrong, I can go, what? That wasn't me. Wasn't me. I don't know where those guys came from, right? So that's what he's doing. And we're going to read, so he keeps sending this marauding army in, and they're supposed to be doing what's called a shock and awe raid. They're going to go in, they're going to burn the village to the ground, take anything valuable, and leave. Right? The problem is, this guy named Elisha keeps telling the king of Israel where the marauders are going to hit next. And it's just really roasting the potatoes of Ben-Hadad. So we're going to pick up the story in verse 8. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of the passing that place because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, which one of you is on the side of the king of Israel? And at this point, what we know about Ben-Hadad is that he most likely had a knife to the throat. And not us. None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Okay, then, go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. Okay, horses and chariots would be top of the line, pulling out all the stops after one guy, one dude. Ben-Hadad is angry. And his machismo, I bet, is on the line a little bit here. Okay, so now we're going to see deductive and inductive reasoning. When I was doing this story with Annalie and Teddy, we were in the middle of a subway. So we took all of the things on the table and we made a visual picture of what was happening. And I love this because Elisha and his servant were the salt and pepper, and they were right here. And then we had all this stuff surrounding him. And first thing in the morning, the servant gets up. And he's out there and he's like brushing his teeth. And he looks up and he sees the glinting armor on the army that's completely surrounding them. Okay, maybe a horse whinnied, I don't know. So the servant's the first guy up. He looks up, the morning sun catches the light on the armor. And I said to Ted, what do you think the servant was thinking just then? And Ted's like looking, he goes, we did. That's pretty accurate. So servant takes stock, right? His eyes are telling him, okay, we did. We did. All right. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, no. I love that. Teddy's like, probably because they couldn't write what he really said. Oh, no, my lord. What shall we do? The servant asked. Okay, so here comes Elijah. Cool cucumber, putting on his bathrobe, coming out there, stretching his back. Okay. How irritating for the servant. Okay, the servant has kicked in to go mode. Like, okay, the adrenaline's pumping. We dead, right? Elijah, shuffle, taking stock. Okay, here's what you have to see. Elisha. All right, so we're going to make a servant a little shorter. He's younger. He's got a full head of hair. All right, okay. All right, so here's the servant. They are both seeing the same thing. Right? Seeing is believing. Oh. Okay, so Elisha's pulse hasn't even quickened. Have you ever been with somebody who refuses to panic? How annoying, right? Do you not see that we're going down here? Every single family get together. I'm in full panic mode, and my husband's like, vacuum, next thing. He refuses to panic. So annoying. Okay. So here we see Elijah's deductive faith. I know who I belong to. Boom, I'm safe. We see the servant's inductive faith. Okay, yeah, we're the good guys, but on account of there's so many bad guys, we dead. Okay? All right. So we have inductive and deductive faith happening at the same time. And then Elisha goes, don't be afraid. The prophet answered, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Okay. And I bet that guy really wanted to believe that. But he couldn't, because his eyes told him otherwise. So then Elijah prayed, open his eyes so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he looked and saw. Okay, here's this army, and then here's this army. Oh, please let me see an instant replay in heaven. Please. So here's the regular army of flesh and blood, and then chariots of fire. Oh, man. Okay, so all of a sudden, the servant can believe now, right? You know what the problem with inductive faith is? That it's exhausting, because we know that we belong to a good God. Yes, this is true. We know that he is in control. Yes, this is true. But I can't see it, therefore I can't feel it. So I'm going to use all of my faith and obedience to override my fear. over and over and over again. And it is exhausting. Elisha is not sweating. Okay, these men are standing next to each other. They are both completely safe. This man can't see it. How many times have I prayed, okay, God, I want to trust you in this. I want to trust you in all things. I know you're in control. I know that you've got it. But I can't override my fear because I just don't know how he's going to do it. And I just don't know how the pieces are going to fall. And I really don't like pain. And I know he doesn't excuse us from that and blah, blah, blah. And then all of my energy is put into overcoming my doubt over and over and over again. And I get through it, but I'm exhausted. And when people come by and they say, the joy of the Lord is your strength, I'm like, you know what? Drop dead. I'm exhausted. There is no joy here and zero strength. You guys never react this way in church? I guess it's just me then. Okay. Like, you just take your little verses and you walk right back out. But God has, here's Elisha. What I know informs what I believe. Boom. All you can do is kill this body. I'm completely free. That is the most purest form of freedom, if only we could see it. Okay, so the great part is how God tells stories. So now we're going to shift into an amazing now you see it, now you don't thing, because God is clearly making a point. What you see is not what you get. What you know is what you will be able to see. All right, so we already know that the king is a wiffle-waffler, kind of bad, kind of good. And so then as the enemy came toward him, so I love this. I love how God's like, you know what? I'm going to actually let them run at you with their swords before. Okay. This guy probably wet himself. Okay. All right. So as the enemy came down toward them, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike the army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elijah had asked. Okay, were they physically blind? No, because they're still able to walk and follow. So now they can't see what they thought they were seeing. And Elisha told them, this is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the men you are looking for. When I watch Star Wars with Teddy, he's like, dude, they got that from Elisha. And I'm like, you are so right. These are not the droids you're looking for. This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. The man they're looking for is talking, okay? And he led them to Samaria. So that's a little bit of a walk, okay? So they're following him, and so they follow him all the way in to enemy territory, past the city wall, so now they're completely locked in. All right, after they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were inside Samaria. So now what are they thinking? We dead. That's right. Whoa. You could see them going, blink, blink. How did we? Oh. This is the last time I'm an enemy for hire, man. Okay. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Say yes, please. Please say yes. Okay. So, whoever did the capturing was allowed to make the choice of life and death for the prisoner. That's why this makes sense, this answer. Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? He's saying, who captured these men? Not you, not me, God. Set food, and what would God do? Oh, here's what he'd do. Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. Okay. How to engage in war 101. Don't feed your enemies a yummy dinner and send them home. So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to the master. So the bands of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. They went back and said, Ben-Hadad, we're out. Because whatever just happened to us, There's a lot of going on that we can't see. We're not going to mess with it anymore. The sad part is, Israel didn't learn very much from any of that. And the rest of the chapter is as things descend into chaos. So, in this story, we see deductive and inductive faith. The essence of faith is informed belief. If God is good and God is in control, I am safe no matter what happens to me. Inductive faith. God is good, God is in control, but all the facts say otherwise. Thus I am afraid, and I will have to override my doubt again and again, and that will erode all of my energy. When Paul was festering in chains and said, I can take joy in any circumstance, Elijah's servant would have been, what? And Elisha would have said, I know, right? The essence of faith is informed belief, but it's not enough just to believe. You must believe in the truth. And then what you believe affects what you see. Faith is never the imagining of unreal things. The theologian Morgan said that. Faith is never the imagining of unreal things. It is the grip of things which cannot be demonstrated to the senses, but which are real. The chariots of horses and fire were actually there. There's a great quote from Charles Spurgeon. He says, that you have not perceived spiritual things is true, but it is no proof that there are none to perceive. The whole case is like that of an Irishman who tried to upset evidence by non-evidence. 4 witnesses saw him commit a murder. He pleaded that he was not guilty and wished to establish his innocence by producing 40 persons who did not see him do it. Of what use would that have been? So if 40 people declare that there is no power in the Holy Ghost, going with the word, this only proves that 40 people do not know what we do. If our eyes were opened, we should see the angel hosts as an encircling fence of fire. But whether we see them or not, they are certainly there. By the theologian Meyer. When you look at the story of Elisha and his servant, it takes all of the lessons of slave world and puts them all together. How is it that you develop this rock-solid deductive reasoning, deductive faith? You spend time getting to know who you belong to. When you start examining your relationship, your role in the God, not God relationship, where do I fall? Oh, that's right, here, in the not God part. First, that's really, really irritating, and all we sense is our lack of control. And then he keeps pushing you through silence and solitude and secrecy and fellowship and evangelism. He keeps showing you, he keeps transforming you to the point where the best part of knowing God is that you realize you are not God. Thus, he is free to do his job, and you are free to do yours. Worry is not in our job description as slaves in slave world. Awesome. Because on account of worry, I have very little time to do anything else. I don't claim to have a lot of this nailed down. This week, as I horribly vented on the person that, one of the people that God has entrusted in my care, I said, if I can't get it together for him, I'm qualified to do nothing, God. I can't do anything. I shouldn't even be allowed to go to Walmart. And God's like, where's this coming from? Because that's not from me. I gave you an assignment. You blew it. Now we've talked about it. Your kid's forgiven you. I've forgiven you. You know what you haven't done? You haven't forgiven you. The longer, the better, the harder you run with God, the easier it gets to forgive yourself and move forward. He's not a God standing there with a gigantic hammer. It says in Zephaniah that he's actually standing here singing over us, rejoicing over us. We make him happy. Albert Einstein said that you can live as if nothing is a miracle or as if everything is. It's a choice. As we go through life, we can choose to see God's work all around us, to become more and more aware of it all the time, to have more to rejoice about and then more to celebrate. Or we can say, you know what? I'm seeing the glass half empty. There's so much chaos and death and dying in the world. God, I just really don't know if you're good. So much of this is a choice. Where are you standing? The reality was the same for both of them. Their perception was vastly different. Next week, we're going to talk about celebration. Celebration solidifies all of the lessons in slave world, when it is that we celebrate and why we celebrate. Probably of all the spiritual disciplines, this is the one worst understood and most poorly practiced. But it's total awesome sauce if you flip it and start celebrating in God's way and in God's time. I'm thinking that night when that servant was sitting next to Elisha, there was some kind of party going on. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for being a God who never changes. You're not tossed about by human debate. Nietzsche can say you're dead. People can decide whether you exist or not. And always you are there, without changing, without removing your grace because you're so irritated with the sheep. Every morning, you set a lavish banquet for me. Even this morning when I got up to tell you how horrible I had messed up yesterday. And you're like, well, sit with me. Tell me all about it. I'm crazy in love with you, Holly Lou. My love is not based on your performance. It never has been. There was nothing you could ever do to save yourself, sweetheart. You belong to me. You are mine. Thus you are all kinds of free. And as we meet every morning and talk this stuff out, we take those chains off again and again and again. Because John 10:10 is real. We don't have to wait until heaven to know what the kingdom of heaven feels like. We know who we belong to. Thus we can collect evidence of God's goodness. Thus we are completely safe, regardless of our circumstance. And joy is our birthright. Thank you, Jesus, for your redeeming grace that is new every morning. Embrace these women right where they're at and carve out one thing for them to surrender, one thing for them to look at differently, because movement is not optional. Open our eyes, Lord, so that we can see. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. Okay, so next week is the last week, and it is the week on Moses going into battle. He's so awesome. Okay, so, but we're going to do things a little bit differently next week. we will have some presents for you on account of my love language is presents. And we're going to have a story. We're going to have a lot of music. But I want you to be thinking about what God has told you over the course of this 3D journey. And if you have anything that you would like to share with the group, keep it short and sweet. And because I know I have no problem getting up and speaking in front of people, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. So I'm giving you a heads up to be praying and thinking about it. Write stuff down if you like to read it. But if you could share something that has encouraged you through this journey, I know that there are people here who need to hear it. So there will be time for that next week. And if you have any pictures, or is that done? Oh. Oh, thank you, Jody. Okay. Wow. Okay. So we're going to have a little optical lesson right now because on account of I got so wrapped up in the story that I can't remember. I need to write it real big in here. Okay. So we have our chart here. And so we're going to turn off the lights. Okay. That was there all along. Right? This is what happens all the time. This is what happens. This is what happens. Oh, I just got a diagnosis of cancer. I have a friend who's battling cancer who has 4 small children. Okay, God, are you still in control? Yes, I am. I never left. I never changed. You are completely safe because I am God. Over and over and over again. It doesn't have to be something so huge. It can be something like, I have a boss who really doesn't like me. And it wears on you. It wears on you. It wears on you to not be able to please someone. Should I just be a jerk back? God's like, I am right here. I haven't changed. I haven't left. This is not surprising me. My monumental failure yesterday was not some sort of shock to God. Faith can exist even when the circumstances tell you not to. Remember, faith is the evidence of things not seen. We should turn back on the light so that our friends can hear. Yeah. So we'll have that up there. That's a little magic trick. That's incandescent ink, so it glows in the dark. But now you can't unsee it. It's not any brighter. It's not any brighter than it has been all night. It doesn't glow. It just reflects. It's just like the FedEx thing. Once you learn to see God, you can't unsee him. And it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds so that whatever's coming at you, you're like, bring it. That's the faith that I aspire for. Sorry, I forgot.